Hey everyone, this is Friedel Hacker AJ Raven. I'm here with my recap and review of Three Pines season number 1, episode number 4 and 3 in a sense, because I just realized that Amazon Prime is going to release this show in batches of 2, so 2 episodes every week, and each episode is going to focus on a new murder mystery while also progressing the main through line, which relates to Blue River's disappearance and Gamache and his crew trying to figure what that's all about. So I'm like, you know what? Even if I end up doing a recap for episode number 3, it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense because we already know what's going to happen in episode number 4. So I'm thinking that before I start my recap of episode number 4, I'm going to give you guys a quick recap of episode number 3, and if I end up missing something, then I'll go back to it when a particular scene in episode number 4 comes up that relates to that particular scene in episode number 3 that I didn't talk about. So yeah, I'm like, I think that will be better instead of individually recapping episode number 3 and 4 and then 5 and 6 and then 7 and 8. So episode number 3, it deals with a new murder mystery. So another person living in Three Pines ends up dying. His name is Mark, and I'm like, okay, so so is everyone in Three Pines just going to start dying in each episode? Does Three Pines even have that many people to kill off in a sense? Anyway, so Mark dies, but it turns out that his death is also it's involved with this entire thing where the residents of Three Pines want to burn down the Saint August school where Cece ended up living, which makes sense, especially because all of the horrors that the indigenous kids had to go through, and they're like, let's burn this house down. And but before they can burn it down, they do pour gasoline outside. They hear that someone's inside, and they go in to check, and they find out that certain teens from Three Pines are drinking and having fun there, and they're graffitiing the place, and they chase them out, and they're like, you know what, there still could be some teens in the house, right? So let's check. So Mark decides to go in towards the cellar on his own, and I'm like, Mark, really? All alone? There's a whole bunch of you searching around the house and you're going to go down there all alone? But yeah, he's down there, and as he's trying to make his way up, he gets attacked by this hooded figure, and yeah, he's dead, and Gamache is on the case, and and of course we get to learn more about the horrors that ended up happening in that property, how kids were tortured in the cellar, and Gamache ends up he realizes that there are a lot of tunnels and secret passageways inside the house and secret torture chambers, and he opens up one of the doors to this torture type chamber where kids were locked in, and they find that Mark's body is in there, and it turns out that Mark didn't die because he was pushed down the stairs. No, someone bashed his head with a rock and he basically bled out. So yeah, his death wasn't pretty. And then we find out that it turns out that there was this person called the caretaker who was basically he was responsible for torturing a lot of kids, and it turns out that the caretaker was Mark's dad. And all of these things really show you that, you know what, these horrors that the indigenous community had to go through, it wasn't that very long. There are still survivors out there. There are still people who remember and everything. Like it, we try to pretend that all of these things, other horrors in human history too, they happened a very, very long time, but no, it's not necessarily a very long time if you really think about it. So Mark tried to he wanted to build a memorial for the survivors and everything that happened at the establishment, and B wasn't into it. B was like, you know what, Mark wanted to make everything about himself. He doesn't get to do that. He doesn't get to play the white savior in order to rid himself of the guilt that he's feeling and everything. And yeah, the narrative is going towards Gamache thinking that B might have something to do with Mark's death, and I'm like, no, that's not it. And then you find out that Mark was living with his best friend. I think his name is Hayden, And Hayden also has a daughter named Sophie, and yes, there's something going on there. And then we find out that Mark was a therapist, right? And Mark was also in contact with Clara's husband Peter, and Peter and Mark ended up having doing something, I guess, over in Ruth's cabin. And yeah, at first I'm like, wait, are they saying that Peter and Mark were having an affair? Were they both queer? But no, it turns out it was something else, which we'll get to in a bit. So once we realized that B was also one of the kids that was tortured in the establishment, this involves B more into Mark's death and makes her a very, very big suspect in a sense. So episode number 4, which is titled The Cruellest Month Part 2, it opens up with a flashback where these 3 kids are trying to run away from the establishment, and they're like, hey, we can't just run away, we can't leave her. And we get a scene of B looking at the three boys from the window, and she's ready to go with them. And she tries to sneak out. However, before she can sneak out, the caretaker ends up stopping her, and of course she's like, well, if I can't escape, you 3 boys should run away. And yeah, the boys run away, and then we come to the present timeline. And we have a scene where Jean and Gamache are outside the church, and they're like basically wondering what kind of god would allow such horrors to happen in his name. And in a sense, it's the people who basically misuse religion to torture people and everything. And Gamache ends up saying this line about how it's as if the horrors that have happened in Three Pines, because of that establishment, that has seeped into the ground somewhere, and everything is linked, and maybe that negative energy is what caused Three Pines to have 2 murders in a year. So we cut to Jean and Armand basically interrogating Peter, and again, I was like, really, are the writers really going to show us, tell us that these 2 were having an affair and a queer character got murdered and everything? But no, thankfully, it turns out that basically Peter was having these therapy sessions with Mark, and he went to the cabin because he wanted to steal Mark's laptop, and he wanted to delete the files because those files contained a lot of personal information related to the sessions. And it turns out that there's something that Peter is hiding, and Peter isn't into sharing it yet. He hasn't even told his wife, and we don't even know. Maybe we'll find out in an upcoming episode or whatnot. I'm not really sure what happened to him. Maybe he was like sexually abused when he was a kid or something. Maybe he caused a best friend to be killed when he was a kid as an accident. I don't know. But yeah, I guess if the writers do decide to explore Peter's backstory, it would probably be in season number 1. So Gamache goes and he decides to talk to Clara because Clara wasn't a fan of Mark and Peter's friendship. And yeah, as far as Clara is concerned, as an artist, she likes to draw subjects who she's drawn to. And she ended up sketching Gamache's face too, because as far as Clara is concerned, she is attracted to people who have something unresolved inside of them. And when she looked at Mark, she didn't feel anything. She didn't feel anything that was worth her time to draw. Like, he had his own demons, but she wasn't into drawing them. And then she's like, do you really think that I ended up killing Mark? And do you really think that I'm capable of murder? And Gamache is like, well, in a sense, everyone is capable of murder. So I'll need your DNA sample, please. So in episode number 3, we found out that the picture showing Blue 2 Rivers was actually a fake. It was as if someone ended up photoshopping her and her boyfriend in the picture. And Isabel was able to figure that out because she noticed that the flash that was present in the eyes of the other people in the picture, it wasn't present in Blue 2 Rivers and her boyfriend Kevin's eyes. So she was like, yep, this is a fake picture. So the case has been reopened, and Isabel went to Kevin's and his brother's house in the previous episode, and yeah, they basically they ran away. Basically, everything is there. He didn't even Tommy. I think his name is Tommy. His name is Tommy, right? Tommy didn't even take his prescription drugs with him. And Isabel tried to search something. She tried to look for something useful in the previous episode, but she couldn't find it. But still, this case is on her mind, so she decides to go back to the house, and she's just searching around the entire vicinity. And as she's about to give up, she notices something wrong with the rug and she basically throws it away. And it turns out that, yeah, the floorboards have these markings as if someone bleached something, possibly blood. And she's like, yep, a fight happened here. Someone could have died. Who knows? So she calls in the forensics team to check it out. In the previous episode, when Gamache and Jean went to Ruth's house because they found a key that belonged to Ruth in what Marx's belongings. So yeah, they were like, okay, so what is this key for? And they realized the key was for the cabin that Peter and Mark used, and that cabin belonged to Ruth. So while they were there, Ruth was trying to help an egg hatch and for her goose, and yeah, it turns out that little I think a goose's kid is called what, a duckling too? I'm not really sure. So yeah, that duckling wasn't necessarily supposed to live, and Ruth ended up helping the duck to hatch by like cracking the shell a bit so that the duckling can come out. And yeah, the nature was like, nope, that duckling wasn't supposed to come out, so even though you helped her, she needs to die. And yeah, Root is just burying the little duckling in the ground, and Gamache helps Root use the shovel to dig the ground deep enough. And this is where Gamache is like, it wasn't your fault, Root. Nature, it's just what nature does. Not everyone can live. And we get a flashback to little Gamache, and he's being given the feather of the blue jay. And there's the scene of a nest, and yeah, this nest thing comes into play near the end of the episode, but I didn't really understand what little Gamache was looking at. Did the mom die trying to protect the chicks? But when the mom died, the chicks also died? I'm not really sure. Before Ruth leaves, she is like, you know what, why don't you go around and stop worrying other people and actually try and find proper evidence, huh? I really hope that Ruth survives. I really hope that Ruth survives the first season. So the forensic team ends up trying to back up the evidence. I think they find like these hair strands, and Isabel is like, do you think that these markings are bleach? Like someone tried to bleach away the blood? They're like, well, we can't be sure, but we'll probably end up, of course, not probably, my bad. Of course, we'll take samples from the floorboards, and yeah, we'll examine them. So Isabel comes back home, and this is where she finds a woman waiting for her outside her house, and she's like, okay, can I help you? So it turns out that this woman on the left, she's from Child Protective Services, and someone made an anonymous call to the department saying that Isabel's daughters are being neglected, and yeah, Isabel can't lose her daughters. She's like, what the heck? And yeah, the agent is very, very understanding of the situation. She understands what Isabel is going through, and she's like, well, you know what, a lot of people do make malicious calls, but we have to take every call seriously. It's procedure. So Isabel, work with me here. So Gamache, Jean, and Nicole go through the footage that they ended up getting from the cell phones that one of the teenagers left. And yeah, in that video, they find out that, yep, Sophie was there. Sophie was there in the house on that night, even though she and her dad lied about it in the previous episode. And it turns out that Sophie is also drinking because of the pressure that she's feeling. From the video footage on the mobile phone, they also find out that B was in the house too that night, even though she lied to Gamache about it. And yeah, Gamache ends up confronting B about it, and he's like, why were you lying, B? And she's like, well, I had my reasons. So if you really think that I ended up killing Mark, why don't you arrest me? And of course we know that she didn't kill Mark. Like it would make no sense. And of course Gamache he's unable to arrest her, and she drives off. Drives off on her bike. So Jean comes in, and he has a big revelation. He's like, this is B's brother. He was at the school too. And B never mentioned a brother, and this is where Jean is like, yeah, her brother and two other boys ended up running away from school one night, and the report said that they ended up drowning in the river the next day, and yeah, so it turns out that one of the kids in the flashback that we saw was actually B's brother. Not only that, there's another connection, because they ended up going through the survivor list and everything and everyone who attended the school, and it turns out that the entire thing is also related to the Two Rivers family. Isabel comes in with her evidence about what she found in that particular house and how the forensic team is going through the samples and everything. And this is where Gamache is like, wait, Isabel, are you okay? And Isabel is like, yeah, no, I'm not. Someone ended up calling child protective services, saying that I'm a neglectful mother and I don't want them taking away my daughters. And Gamache is like, who the heck would do that? And you know what? Don't worry about it. No one is going to take your daughters away. Before Gamache goes to talk to Mary to Rivers about her past, he goes and pays a visit to Peter, and he ends up giving Peter a flash drive, and he's like, Peter, here are the notes that Mark took of you. I took them from his laptop, and Peter is like, did you read them? And Gamache is like, not all of them, just enough to realize that, yep, you were telling the truth. And he ends up giving the flash drive to Peter, and he's like, it's up to you. You can destroy these notes if you want, because yeah, it's up to you if you want to share that part of your life with someone. Again, we as the audience don't necessarily know what Peter is talking about, but Gamache is like, but Peter, trying to carry such a burden, it eats away at the soul, and it's not good for marriage. So basically, Gamache wants Peter to tell the truth to his wife, or to, at least to someone, about what he went through. And I'm like, tell us too, the audience, tell us too, Peter. What is all this about? So we get to see Jean and Isabel spending the time in the house, and yeah, this is where they hear something in the basement, and Isabel is like, we have to go and check it out. And John is like, really? Really? Are you serious? And Isabel is like, come on, let's go. And he's like, should we call backup? And she's like, let's just go. The noise ends up being caused by a raccoon, and yeah, Jean is very, very scared, which, you know what? It makes sense. I would be scared too. And this is where Isabel notices another trap door, and she's like, I'm going in. And John is like, really? Really, Isabel? So as she's going through the secret tunnel, she ends up noticing a phone. She picks it up, and then she continues along the tunnel. And I'm like, Isabel, don't get yourself hurt. So it turns out that the tunnel ended up opening inside the house, and as she's coming out, Jean is also coming upstairs. And yeah, he gets scared after seeing Isabel. It was a very, very funny scene. And they're like, yep, this tunnel, whoever ended up murdering Mark, that person could have easily used this tunnel in order to kill Mark and stash him away and basically come out without being seen and connect with the rest of the group, join the rest of the group. And I guess that person also ended up dropping Mark's phone along the way without realizing. But now it turns out that that person who ended up killing Mark, they ended up basically stashing the phone inside the tunnel, hoping that no one would find it. So we go to the Two Rivers residence with Isabel and Gamache, and this is where, yeah, they want to ask Mary some questions, but Mary is like, no, my granddaughter has something to say. And it turns out that the anonymous call that was made to the Child Protective Services, she made it, and she apologizes, but Isabel is like, why the heck would you do that? And she's like, well, I wanted to make you feel what we have been going through, and what it feels to lose someone you love, so maybe you'll go out and find Blue for us. And I'm like, okay, she's a kid, but still, that was a very, very bad move, in a sense. Like, that could have gotten Isabel and her kids in a lot of trouble. So they ask Mary about whether or not she knew about Matthew and the boys running away, and she's like, yeah, I knew. I heard that the 3 boys ran away and they ended up dying in the river by drowning while they were trying to cross it, but I know the truth. And Gamache is like, what is that? Well, the caretaker ended up running after them, and he caught up with them, and Gamache is like, what did he do to them? And she's like, they're still there. They're still in the school. And I was like, oh. So Gamache goes in and he starts digging in the basement and trying to find the remains of the 3 kids in a very, very intense scene. And I'm like, Gamache, I understand what you're doing, but I don't think that you should be doing this all alone. Why not ask for help? Why are you digging all by yourself? And I mean, you aren't necessarily young in a sense. And even if you were young, you shouldn't be digging all by yourself. And yeah, as he's digging, he ends up finding the remains, and yeah, he breaks down. He breaks down, which is understandable. So they call in the team, and yeah, the rest of the team is digging through the entire property, because if there's 1 or 3 kids, there are probably more. Like the horrors that the indigenous community had to go through. And again, not so very long ago, not so very long ago. And Gamache and Nicole end up apologizing to Isabel, and she's like, yeah, I understand where you guys are coming from, like. So the team was able to gather some DNA samples from the remains, and yeah, one of the kids was B's brother, and Gamache ends up going to meet B, and he's like, B, we found your brother, and wow, just wow. So we have this entire scene where the indigenous community has joined together. They've come together in order to pay their respects to the kids that were there, and pay their respects to B's brother. So she gets some closure, and she ends up sharing the name of her brother with Gamache and everything. And again, she's like, you know that we didn't kill Mark, but I'm also not necessarily very sad that he died, in a sense. And Gamache is like, well, can you help me with anything to point me in the right direction? And she's like, well, I'm not necessarily sure if it's something, but the morning before Mark died, he ended up having this argument with Hayden, and they were really yelling. And Sophie, it was I think about Sophia too. And Gamache was like, okay, I'll need to go and talk to that family again. So we get this scene where Sophie is playing the piano, and her dad walks in, and he's like, Sophie, what's up? And she's like, well, this is a song that Mark really enjoyed listening. And anyway, the inspector came in, the detective, and he wants to talk to you again. And she ends up handing Hayden Gamache's card. And I'm like, yep. I mean, it's clear. It's clear that Hayden ended up killing Mark. And then we have this argument between Hayden and Sophie, where Hayden is like, where the heck are you going, Sophie? And she's like, I'm just going out to grab a soda or something. And he's like, you can't just go out on your own. I need to protect you. You were at the establishment. Weren't you, Sophie? I lied to the police. I lied to the police for you. And Sophie's like, you didn't have to. And she just storms off. And then we get this scene between Peter and Clara, and it implies that Peter is going to tell the truth to Clara. And I'm like, again, the audience, we're sitting over here. Tell us the truth too, Peter. So Gamache is just looking at this nest, and he's like, yep. Basically, parent birds don't necessarily like anything coming near their nests, and they will try to do everything possible, even put their own lives on the line in order to protect their eggs or their chicks. We also get a little flashback where, a brief flashback where little Gamache is being told by, I think, his mom that she loves him, and he's like, yeah, I love you too. Anyway, Gamache goes back to his headquarters, and he's like, did you guys find something? And yeah, they did. So it turns out that even though Mark was living with Hayden rent-free, and Hayden was letting Mark live with him because he was like, maybe my best friend is broke, but no, it turns out that Mark had a lot of money. He had like $100,000 saved up. And they also found out that Mark ended up buying a ticket to New York under Sophie's name, and they're like, yep, something's happening here. And I was like, really? Writers, don't say that Mark and Sophie were having an affair. And thankfully that didn't happen. So Nicole comes in with more information from the cell phone that Isabel found, and she's like, well, I have a whole lot of these conversations between Mark and Sophie, and Jean is like, were they having an affair? And Nicole is like, don't be presumptuous, don't presume. But no, it turns out that Mark was actually helping Sophie get into the school that she wanted to get into, some art school in New York. And yeah, you can tell that Sophie wants to break away from her very, very overbearing father, basically a helicopter parent, and yeah, she wanted to get away from him, and Mark was helping Sophie kind of get away from it all, but Mark was also feeling guilty because he was like, Sophie, you have to tell your dad because I don't like keeping such a big secret from my best friend. So the team goes to talk to Hayden and Sophie, and they go into the house, and it turns out that they're not there. They basically ran away. So we get the scene of Hayden driving his daughter to, I think, a place in Montreal, and he's like, we'll stay there and everything, and Sophie, and this is where, and they also talk about Mark, and he's like, were you sleeping with Mark? And she's like, what the heck, Dad? How can you even think that? And I'm like, thankfully, these two were not sleeping together. That would have been Very, very, very weird. Especially because Mark was also Sophie's godfather. And yeah, she's like, she ends up telling Hayden the truth about how Mark was helping her get into NYU. And he's like, well, it was Mark, right? Mark put that idea into your head. And she's like, no, 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 I wanted to do that myself. I want to be independent because people with my condition, which is basically like she has limited eyesight, she's like, people with my condition live very, very normal lives. And he's like, no, 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 no. Yeah, you don't know how tough it is out there. And he keeps on driving. And this is where one of the police cars notices Hayden's and starts following him. So yeah, Sophie is like, I was sick of living in that prison, sick of being with you, and yada yada yada. And she's like, Dad, with the police after us, why aren't you slowing down? Slow down, Dad, slow down. And of course, Hayden is not slowing down. And then we get this scene where Bear just pops out of nowhere, a CG bear, and Hayden has to stop, and everyone stops, and Gamache and the rest of the crew are able to come into the scene as well, and they have their guns aimed at the bear, and they also want Sophie and Hayden to come out of the car slowly. And I'm like, really, a bear? Couldn't it have been like a fallen tree or something? But no, a CGI bear for some reason. And after Hayden has been arrested and Sophie is safe, the bear just walks away. I'm not really sure what the writers were trying to do here. Maybe they're trying to say that Tree Pines, in a sense, is alive, and Tree Pines knows how to take care of certain situations. I'm not really sure. So Gamache ends up confronting Hayden, and he's like, why the heck would you kill your best friend? And Hayden is like, it was an accident. And Gamache is like, no, it wasn't an accident. You don't accidentally bash your best friend's head until he dies. And Hayden is like, I did this for my daughter. My little girl was in danger. She doesn't know what's out there. And Gamache is like, your little girl isn't a little girl anymore. But anyway, Hayden has been arrested, and of course he'll be sent to prison. And Nicole is like, how the heck did you know, detective? And this is where Gamache gives us a little explanation. And he's like, well, I ended up talking to Cece's husband. And yeah, it turns out that Hayden was giving piano lessons at the house. So he knew... I'm not really sure if he ended up talking to Cece's husband or maybe someone else, but in a sense, it was just to say that Hayden knew the layout of the house. He knew about the secret tunnels and passageways and everything. And also, Gamache says that if you go near a nest of chicks, the mummy bird will freak out. So yeah, basically parents will do everything in their power to keep their children safe. So of course Hayden, because of how he had been keeping an eye on Sophie for a very, very long time, and especially because of her condition, he didn't want her basically facing the world on her own, and he was basically suffocating her. And yeah, that led to him killing Mark, because Mark was allowing Sophie a chance to get away from Hayden, and he couldn't have that. And then we get to a scene where Gamache and Sophie are again talking about the Blue 2 River case. And they're like, do you think that she died in that house? And then they bleached up the blood. And Isabella's like, you know what? We can't really be sure until the reports come in. But it's looking bad for Kevin. And as these two are talking, they get a announcement, a warning, basically, emergency warning that something has happened at the St. August School and they need to get there. And it turns out that the place has been burnt down and the rest of the residents are standing there. And Gamache basically looks at all of them. He looks at B. And yeah, they give him a very, very knowing look. And he knows. He knows that they ended up burning the place down. Which, you know what? Good riddance. I know that some people are like, we need to preserve certain historical sites. But then again, I'm like, you know what? Not like this. Not like this. Take a picture or something. Burn that place to the ground. And Gamache just walks away from the scene without doing anything because he understands why the residents ended up burning the place down. He understands that. So yeah, this is where the episode ended, and I'm looking forward to seeing who is going to get murdered in the next episode. Again, if that person that ends up getting murdered is a resident of Tree Pines, and I'm like, wow. Like, a whole lot of people are dying in this very, very little community. But anyway, I really liked this. I really like the storytelling that's going on, especially because of how it handles the main major storyline related to Blue Two Rivers. And also, I forgot in the previous episode we also saw Gamash's wife coming in to pay a visit to check up on him. So that was a very sweet scene. Apparently, he has kids, he has grandchildren, so maybe we'll get to see them for moving like down the line. Anyway, let me know what you thought of episodes number 3 and 4. Did certain twists take you by surprise? Like the fact that I really thought that Mark and Peter were having an affair. I'm glad that they weren't. I'm also glad that Sophie and Mark weren't having an affair. So yeah, there were twists that took me by surprise. But yeah, let me know what you thought of the episode down in the comment section below. And until next time, stay happy, stay safe, stay blessed. See you guys later. Bye.